The night was supposed to be like any other glittering evening in Manhattan. Flashbulbs popped in the cold winter air, limousines lined the entrance of the Crystal Heights Hotel, and journalists huddled behind velvet ropes, waiting for their next scandal to feed on. But what happened that night would not only stain reputations, it would shatter lives and rewrite destinies. Marcus Bennett stepped out of his black town car with the confidence of a man who thought the city belonged to him. Tall, handsome, and dressed in a tailored midnight suit, he looked every bit the powerful entrepreneur he pretended to be. But it wasn't business that made him smirk at the waiting cameras. It was the young woman clinging to his arm, Chloe Adams, 27, glamorous, hungry for attention, and very proud to be paraded as his mistress. She leaned in, whispering something in his ear that made him laugh far too loudly. Their laughter echoed down the marble steps, captured by flashing cameras and whispered into microphones. Inside their penthouse, however, a different story was unfolding. Olivia Bennett, his wife, sat alone on the edge of a velvet couch, her hand resting on the gentle curve of her belly. 6 months pregnant, she was supposed to be at his side tonight. Instead, she was staring at the television screen, where Marcus's arrival with Chloe was already being broadcast live. The image was cruel. Her husband, the man who had once held her hand in front of these very cameras, now smiling as if she had never existed. Her throat tightened, but she refused to cry, not yet. The tabloids had whispered for weeks about Marcus's late-night meetings, his sudden business trips, and the unfamiliar perfume lingering on his suits. Tonight, he had turned whispers into proof. In front of New York's elite, in front of the world, he had chosen Chloe. The television flickered as the reporters shouted questions. "Marcus, where's Olivia? Marcus, is Chloe your new partner?" He didn't answer. He simply pulled Chloe closer, kissed her cheek, and led her inside. The crowd gasped. The betrayal wasn't just private anymore, it was public property. Olivia's hand trembled on her belly. The baby shifted inside her, a reminder of the bond she had once believed unbreakable. She whispered softly, "It's just you and me now." The words steadied her, but only just. She felt humiliated, abandoned, and invisible all at once. Her phone buzzed with messages, friends sending pity, relatives sending outrage, but she ignored them. She didn't need pity. She needed strength. Meanwhile, at the gala, Marcus basked in the attention. He moved through the ballroom with Chloe as though they were royalty. The chandeliers sparkled above, violins played softly, and champagne flowed like water. Chloe relished every moment, her laughter piercing, her gold dress shimmering under the lights. She leaned into Marcus and whispered, "She must be crying at home right now. Poor Olivia. Did you even tell her?" Marcus only smirked. "She'll get over it. She always does." But Marcus underestimated Olivia. She wasn't going to get over it. She wasn't going to forgive. Something inside her had cracked wide open, and cracks, once formed, don't disappear, they grow. Back in the penthouse, Olivia rose from the couch, her legs unsteady, but her resolve growing with every step. She walked to Marcus's office, a room she rarely entered. His desk was littered with contracts, champagne corks, and photographs of him shaking hands with business partners. Yet what caught her eye wasn't the chaos of paperwork. It was the neatly folded divorce papers she had drafted weeks ago, but never signed. She had been waiting, hoping, clinging to the illusion that Marcus would return to the man she once knew. Tonight, that illusion had died. Her hand hovered over the papers. A single tear slid down her cheek, but her voice was steady as she whispered to herself, "This ends now." Across town, the gala was heating up. Investors clapped Marcus on the back, praising his charm, ignoring the whispers about his mistress. Chloe was radiant, but her eyes darted across the room, searching for validation. She wanted envy. She wanted Olivia's ghost banished forever. And yet, despite the smiles and champagne, Marcus felt a flicker of unease. Because no matter how loudly the orchestra played, no matter how brightly the chandeliers glowed, he couldn't shake the feeling that someone, somewhere, was watching him and waiting. That someone was Olivia. She wasn't at the gala, not tonight, but her silence was louder than any scandal. And silence, when broken, can roar. She pressed her hand against her belly once more, the weight of her child grounding her in the storm. The betrayal burned, but beneath the ashes of heartbreak, something new was forming. It wasn't just anger, it wasn't just grief, it was a fire a determination she hadn't felt in years. Marcus had chosen humiliation. Olivia would choose survival. And one day soon, she would walk into a room, not as his forgotten wife, but as a woman reborn. The cameras captured Marcus and Chloe raising their glasses, oblivious to the storm they had unleashed. The reporters called it romance. Olivia knew better. It was the beginning of their downfall. Because love, once betrayed, becomes something far more dangerous than hate, it becomes resolve. And as the night stretched on, as Marcus lost himself in applause and Chloe drowned in envy, Olivia stood alone in the penthouse, pen in hand, divorce papers before her. She signed her name with a steady stroke, sealing not just an end, but a beginning. When she placed the pen down, she whispered one final promise to herself and her child: "We will rise." But what Olivia didn't know was that fate was about to give her an ally. Someone powerful, someone silent, someone watching. And his arrival would change everything. Because the man who would one day silence Marcus with a single word was already closer than she realized. Olivia Bennett had never been the kind of woman who craved spotlights or applause. She came from a modest suburb in Connecticut where weekends were spent in her mother's cozy kitchen, that learning how to bake bread, and evenings ended with her father's laughter echoing across their small backyard. She grew up believing in simple joys, in the power of love, in the safety of family. Perhaps that was why she fell for Marcus Bennett so completely. He wasn't just handsome or ambitious. He made promises. Promises of forever, of building a home together, of cherishing her no matter what storms came their way. Back then, Olivia was already making a name for herself as a talented interior designer. Her work was fresh, personal, and filled with warmth. While others filled houses with expensive furniture, Olivia created homes that told stories. Word of mouth spread quickly, and soon she was being approached by magazines for features, by clients for projects that would have catapulted her career into a different league. Yet when Marcus proposed, kneeling under the twinkling lights of a winter festival in Central Park, Olivia didn't hesitate. She believed she could balance both, her marriage and her career. But marriage to Marcus quickly became a different reality. He liked having her at home, liked coming back to freshly prepared dinners, liked being the center of her world. He didn't say, "Quit your job." He didn't have to. He'd sigh when she worked late. He'd frown when she took phone calls during dinner. And soon, little by little, Olivia began declining projects. "Just for now," she told herself. "Once Marcus is more settled, I'll go back." The years slipped by, and Olivia became the invisible force behind Marcus's rise. She managed his schedules, hosted his business dinners, remembered the birthdays of his investors' wives. When he returned from late meetings, she was waiting with his favorite tea. When he bragged about his achievements at galas, she smiled at his side, knowing she had been the one ironing his shirts at 2 a.m. and proofreading his proposals when he fell asleep at the desk. He called her his lucky charm. But she wasn't lucky. She was giving everything, and he was taking it all. And then came the baby. When Olivia discovered she was pregnant, joy swelled through her like sunlight after a storm. She imagined Marcus's smile, imagined him placing his hand on her belly and whispering promises to their child. At first, he seemed happy, kissing her forehead, talking about nursery colors. But soon the excitement faded. He became restless, distracted. He started going out more often, claiming late-night meetings, returning with faint traces of perfume that wasn't hers. She wanted to believe the best of him, wanted to protect the family they hadn't even fully built yet. So she swallowed her doubts. She told herself she was overthinking. But the loneliness grew heavier with every passing week. Olivia spent her mornings browsing baby catalogs alone, her afternoons visiting doctors alone, her evenings eating in silence at the grand dining table. She kept reminding herself of the woman she had once been, the young designer full of dreams, the daughter who had promised her parents she would live boldly. Where had that woman gone? The mirror showed a stranger, one with tired eyes, a forced smile, and hands always folded over a growing belly as if clutching for comfort. The betrayal at the gala wasn't just about Marcus's infidelity. It was about everything Olivia had sacrificed. Every late night she had stayed up to support him. Every opportunity she had let slip away. Every moment she had silenced her own voice to let his be louder. Seeing him walk into the Crystal Heights Hotel with Chloe on his arm wasn't just humiliation, it was a declaration. He had chosen to erase her, to replace her, as if all those years meant nothing. Yet the world underestimated Olivia. They always had. To outsiders, she was just the quiet wife, the supportive woman in the background. To Marcus, she was a convenience. To Chloe, she was competition already defeated. But deep inside Olivia, beneath the exhaustion and heartbreak, lived the same fire that had once driven her to design homes that spoke to people's souls. That fire was flickering again now, fueled by betrayal, fanned by injustice. She thought back to the last conversation she had with her mother before she passed. Her mother had taken her hand and whispered, "Don't ever let someone else write your story, Liv. Your voice matters. Your life is yours." For years, Olivia had forgotten those words, drowned under Marcus's shadow. But now, with her child's future in her hands, she couldn't afford to forget anymore. The truth was brutal but simple. Marcus had built his empire on her silence. Chloe had mocked her simplicity, her quiet clothes, her lack of presence in society pages. But Olivia's strength had never been in noise. It was in resilience. It was in the ability to endure storms and still stand. And now, for the first time in years, she wasn't thinking about saving her marriage or pleasing her husband. She was thinking about herself and her baby. As she folded the signed divorce papers neatly into an envelope, Olivia felt an unfamiliar sensation. It wasn't joy. It wasn't relief. It was something sturdier, resolve. She was done being Marcus's shadow. She was done being Chloe's punchline. She was done being the quiet woman who let the world walk over her. She looked out the penthouse window, the skyline of New York glittering like 1,000 possibilities. Somewhere in that city, Marcus was laughing, drinking champagne, believing he had won. But he didn't know the truth. He didn't know that Olivia had more power than he could imagine. He didn't know that fate was aligning her with someone who could change everything. Alexander Reed, a man Marcus feared, a man who had the influence to silence him with a single word. Olivia pressed a hand against her belly once more and whispered, "We're not broken. We're beginning." And as the city pulsed outside, her transformation quietly began. One that would turn humiliation into power and betrayal into justice. The Crystal Heights Hotel stood like a palace in the middle of Manhattan, its glass facade glittering against the winter night. For decades, it had been the chosen venue for New York's elite. Politicians, celebrities, CEOs, and socialites who measured their worth by the shine of their diamonds and the size of their donations. Tonight, the annual Hearts for Tomorrow Gala filled the ballroom. It was more than just a charity event. It was the arena where reputations were forged, alliances sealed, and scandals whispered into champagne glasses. The ballroom was breathtaking. Crystal chandeliers dripped from the ceiling like frozen waterfalls, scattering light across gold-trimmed walls. The air was thick with perfume, clinking glassware, and the soft murmur of moneyed voices. Tables draped in ivory linens lined the polished marble floors, each centerpiece a towering arrangement of orchids flown in from Singapore. At the center of it all stretched the red-carpeted runway, where the city's most powerful would parade themselves. Each appearance carefully calculated, each smile rehearsed. On this night, Marcus Bennett thrived. To the cameras flashing outside, he was the picture of success, an ambitious businessman who had clawed his way into New York's high circles. But once inside, away from the public scrutiny, his arrogance expanded to fill the room. He moved confidently between clusters of investors, shaking hands, telling stories, pretending his empire was untouchable. Chloe Adams clung to his arm, her sequin dress catching every flicker of light, her laughter ringing like an alarm bell across the ballroom. She loved being seen, loved the whispers, loved the daggers in women's eyes as they sized her up. She leaned close to Marcus, her voice sharp, despite the sweetness she tried to coat it with. "Everyone's staring," she purred. "That's the point," Marcus replied, straightening his tie. "Let them look. Let them know who runs this city." But not everyone admired. Some raised eyebrows, some whispered behind crystal flutes of champagne. They knew Marcus was married, knew Olivia Bennett had been his loyal wife for years. Yet here he was, flaunting Chloe as though fidelity were a relic of the past. Still, in this world, money often excused sins. As long as Marcus kept profits rising, few would dare confront him. The orchestra played a waltz as waiters glided between tables with trays of caviar and champagne. Conversation sparkled as brightly as the chandeliers. Names like Rockefeller and Vanderbilt floated through the air, stories of mergers and acquisitions told as though they were bedtime tales. Everyone was performing, because that was what the gala demanded. And yet, beneath the glitter, tension pulsed. Those who knew Marcus's reputation watched with curiosity. Some pitied Olivia, imagining her at home, too fragile to face the humiliation. Others scoffed, dismissing her as weak. They were wrong. Olivia was not weak, she was preparing. Outside the hotel, cameras still flashed, capturing late arrivals. A black car pulled up and the photographers surged forward, expecting another celebrity. Instead, the door opened to reveal Olivia Bennet. The crowd gasped. She stepped out carefully, her hand resting on her growing belly. Gone was the quiet, modest wife Marcus had discarded. Tonight, Olivia wore a gown of deep emerald silk that shimmered like the ocean under moonlight. Her hair was swept into a sleek chignon, her face calm but radiant, her eyes carrying a determination no one had seen before. She wasn't there to blend in. She was there to be seen. Gasps rippled through the press line. Reporters shouted questions. Cameras clicked furiously. "Olivia, are you here to confront your husband? Olivia, do you have a statement?" She didn't answer. She simply walked forward, her steps measured, her gaze steady. For the first time in years, the spotlight belonged to her. Inside, Marcus was mid-conversation with a Japanese investor when the murmurs began. Heads turned toward the entrance. His smile faltered. Chloe followed the direction of the stairs, her grip tightening on his arm. And then Marcus saw her. Olivia. His wife. His pregnant wife. Standing tall in front of the grand double doors, every inch the woman he had tried to erase. For a moment, the music seemed to fade. The laughter dulled. The entire ballroom held its breath. Olivia moved through the room with quiet grace, each step echoing louder than any waltz. The silk of her gown whispered against the marble floor, her presence commanding more attention than Chloe's sequins ever could. People whispered her name, some with admiration, some with shock. She didn't waver. She wasn't there to beg, wasn't there to plead. She was there to reclaim her dignity. Marcus's jaw tightened. Chloe's smile wavered. Investors exchanged curious glances, waiting for the scene to explode. Marcus muttered under his breath, "What the hell is she doing here?" "She's supposed to be at home," Chloe hissed, her eyes narrowing. But Olivia wasn't at home anymore. She was right here, in their world, in their arena, refusing to be invisible. She stopped in the center of the ballroom, directly beneath the grand chandelier, and looked around. For a brief moment, her eyes met Marcus's. He froze. The arrogance drained from his face, replaced by something he hadn't felt in years: fear. Olivia's gaze then shifted to Chloe, who stiffened under its weight. Chloe tried to smirk, tried to whisper something snide to Marcus, but her confidence faltered. Because this wasn't the Olivia she mocked. This was someone different, someone untouchable. The orchestra played on, but the energy of the room had shifted. Guests leaned forward, eager to see what would happen. The tension was palpable, thick as the scent of perfume in the air. And then, just as the whispers reached their peak, another figure entered the room. A tall man in a tailored black suit, his presence commanding instant respect. Alexander Reed, billionaire investor. A man whose word could sway entire markets. His appearance sent a ripple through the crowd. He was rarely seen at public events, preferring shadows to spotlights. Yet here he was, and his eyes were fixed not on Marcus, not on Chloe, but on Olivia. Marcus felt his throat tighten. Chloe clutched his arm harder, sensing danger. The entire ballroom turned, waiting for what came next. And Olivia? She simply lifted her chin, her hand still resting protectively on her belly, and allowed the silence to speak for her. Because the night was no longer Marcus's to control. The stage, the spotlight, the story, it now belonged to Olivia Bennet. Marcus Bennet had always believed he was the smartest man in any room. Born in Queens to a middle-class family, he grew up with a chip on his shoulder. He wasn't content with an ordinary life. He wanted skyscrapers, private jets, and a name whispered in boardrooms. But ambition alone doesn't build empires. It needs sacrifice. And Marcus's favorite sacrifice had always been other people. When he married Olivia, he convinced himself it was love. But in truth, he saw her as stability, She grounded him, softened his rough edges, and made him look respectable to investors who valued a family man. Behind closed doors, however, Marcus's charm faded into criticism. He picked at Olivia's choices, dismissed her career, and chipped away at her confidence until she believed her own silence was support. For Marcus, her sacrifices were not a gift. They were an entitlement. As his business ventures grew, so did his ego. He craved validation, thrived on admiration, and lived for the rush of power when people bent to his will. Money had given him control, and he wielded it like a weapon. The more he gained, the less he saw Olivia as an equal. She became background, a wife who hosted dinners, who smiled at galas, who never asked for more. Until Chloe arrived. Chloe Adams was everything Marcus thought he deserved. Young, glamorous, and hungry for the spotlight. She grew up in Los Angeles, bouncing between auditions and failed modeling gigs, always chasing fame but never catching it. By 27, she had perfected the art of surviving off charm and calculation. When she met Marcus at a high-profile fundraiser, she saw exactly what he was. Not just a man, but a stepping stone. Marcus believed he had chosen Chloe. In reality, Chloe had chosen him. She flattered him, stroked his ego, whispered promises of passion and excitement that Olivia, in his eyes, no longer gave. She laughed at his jokes louder than anyone else, made him feel young again, made him forget the weight of responsibility. Soon, Marcus wasn't just sneaking around, he was flaunting her. The thrill of betrayal fed his pride. But Chloe's loyalty was shallow. She loved the lifestyle, the designer clothes, the cameras flashing when she walked beside him, the whispers that she had won. To her, Olivia wasn't just a rival, she was an obstacle that needed to be humiliated, erased. Every time she saw Marcus glance nervously at Olivia's name, Chloe's satisfaction deepened. "Why don't you just leave her already?" she had teased Marcus one evening, her red nails trailing across his arm. "She's pregnant," Marcus muttered, pouring himself another glass of whiskey. Chloe smirked. "So? That's her problem, not yours." It was cruelty disguised as honesty, and Marcus admired it. She said things he was too cowardly to voice. Where Olivia had been gentle, Chloe was ruthless. And in Marcus's twisted logic, that ruthlessness was what made him feel powerful. At the Crystal Heights Gala, they believed they were untouchable. Together, they moved like a performance piece. Chloe radiant in her sequined gown, Marcus beaming with arrogance. The investors, the journalists, the guests, they were supposed to see a power couple. A man who had traded ordinary for extraordinary. But when Olivia entered the ballroom, their carefully built facade cracked. Chloe's eyes narrowed instantly. She recognized danger when she saw it. The emerald gown, the calm poise, the silence that commanded more attention than Chloe's laughter ever could, it unsettled her. "She shouldn't be here," Chloe hissed under her breath. Marcus forced a smile, but his jaw tightened. For the first time in years, he felt his confidence slip. He had expected Olivia to crumble quietly, to vanish into obscurity. Instead, she had walked into his world with a presence he couldn't control. Still, Marcus wasn't ready to surrender. Arrogance clung to him like armor. He excused himself from his investors, tugged Chloe closer, and whispered, "Relax. She doesn't have the guts to make a scene. She's weak, always has been." But his words sounded hollow, even to himself. Chloe's smirk returned, though it was thinner than before. "Then let's make sure she stays that way." Throughout the evening, Chloe played her role with venomous precision. She laughed too loudly when Marcus spoke, tossed Olivia cutting glances, and whispered cruel comments loud enough for nearby guests to hear. "Poor thing," she murmured, pretending sympathy. "It must be hard, carrying his baby and still losing him." Each barb was designed to draw blood, but Olivia didn't flinch. And that was what terrified Chloe most. Marcus, meanwhile, drowned his nerves in champagne. He told himself he still held the upper hand. Olivia had no power, no money, no allies. She was just the discarded wife, clinging to dignity. He couldn't see the truth, that the balance had already shifted. Because power isn't just in money or status, it's in perception. And tonight, everyone in that ballroom was watching Olivia, not him. Behind the glitter and arrogance, Marcus and Chloe shared a single flaw. They underestimated her. They mistook silence for surrender, humility for weakness. They thought betrayal had broken her. What they didn't know was that betrayal had awakened her. And in the shadows of the ballroom, another man had noticed too. Alexander Reed watched silently, his gaze fixed not on Marcus's bravado or Chloe's theatrics, but on Olivia's quiet strength. He saw what no one else had yet recognized, that Olivia Bennet was no victim. She was the storm. Marcus and Chloe continued their charade, blind to the shifting tide. They believed the night belonged to them. But soon, Marcus's arrogance and Chloe's cruelty would collide with a truth they couldn't laugh off, couldn't dismiss, couldn't erase. Because for the first time, Olivia wasn't playing their game. She was preparing to end it. The orchestra's violins swelled, but the music could not drown the whispers racing like wildfire across the Crystal Heights ballroom. All eyes had shifted away from Marcus Bennet and his glittering mistress. They were no longer the spectacle. The true center of gravity now stood beneath the chandelier. Olivia Bennet, radiant in emerald silk, 6 months pregnant, walking with a grace that silenced the crowd. Every flash of a camera felt like a dagger to Marcus's pride. He had planned the night to flaunt Chloe, to erase Olivia from memory. Instead, Olivia's arrival had turned his triumph into a trap. The guests who once hung on his every word now watched Olivia with fascination and with pity for him. Marcus hated pity. Chloe squeezed his arm tighter, her sequins flashing under the lights. "Don't just stand here," she hissed through clenched teeth. "Do something. Everyone's watching." Marcus forced a grin, though it looked more like a grimace. He tugged Chloe forward, striding toward Olivia as though he still controlled the room. The crowd parted, eager to witness the collision. Champagne glasses trembled in hands, conversations halted mid-sentence. When Marcus finally stood before Olivia, he leaned in with a smirk meant to disguise his unease. "What are you doing here, Liv?" he muttered, his voice low enough for only her to hear. "This isn't your world anymore." Olivia held his gaze, unflinching. "It never was yours to give or take, Marcus." The quiet strength in her tone unsettled him more than any shout could have. For a moment, he felt exposed, as though everyone could see the cracks in his arrogance. Chloe, unwilling to let silence hang, stepped forward. Her smile was sharp, her voice deliberately loud. "Olivia, darling, what a surprise. I thought you'd be home, resting. Carrying a child must be exhausting." She tilted her head, feigning sympathy, while her words sliced through the air. "But I suppose curiosity got the better of you. You had to see for yourself what you lost." Gasps rippled through the guests. The cruelty was naked, and though many in the room disapproved, no one dared interfere. They wanted the drama. They wanted the fall. Olivia inhaled slowly, her hand resting protectively on her belly. The old Olivia, the one who would have smiled weakly, swallowed her pain, and retreated, was gone. She straightened her shoulders and replied softly, "I didn't lose anything tonight. I walked away from it." Her calm words landed heavier than a scream. Chloe faltered, her smirk wavering, but Marcus tightened his grip on her arm as if to remind her of the performance. "Enough of this," Marcus muttered, raising his voice for the crowd. "Ladies and gentlemen, forgive the interruption. My wife, ex-wife rather, seems confused about her place tonight." He forced a laugh, expecting the room to echo it. Instead, silence deepened. The investors who once adored his bravado now exchanged uneasy glances. The word ex-wife had been spoken too soon, too casually, in a room where perception was everything. Olivia didn't flinch. She stepped closer, her eyes steady on his. "Confused? No, Marcus. I'm perfectly clear. I came tonight to remind you, and everyone here, that I will not be erased." The room exhaled as though it had been holding its breath. The orchestra faltered, then fell silent altogether. Even the waiters froze mid-step. Marcus's face reddened. He was losing control, and control was everything to him. "You dare come here, humiliate me in front of everyone?" "Humiliate you?" Olivia's voice didn't rise, yet it cut sharper than his anger. "You managed that yourself when you chose vanity over vows, selfishness over family." The words hung in the air, undeniable and raw. Chloe tried to salvage the moment. She placed her hand on Marcus's chest, laughing lightly as though Olivia's presence was nothing but entertainment. "Oh, Olivia, bitterness doesn't suit you. You should thank Marcus. Without him, you'd still be, what, decorating tiny apartments, living in obscurity?" This time, the whispers in the crowd turned against her. Chloe's arrogance, once thrilling, now reeked of cruelty. Even those who had pitied Olivia began to admire her composure. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't begged, hadn't lashed out. She stood tall while her husband and his mistress unraveled. And then, as if the scene weren't dramatic enough, the final blow came. Not from Olivia, not from Marcus, but from the audience itself. One of Marcus's oldest investors, a man known for his brutal honesty, muttered just loud enough for others to hear. "A man who treats his wife like this can't be trusted in business either." The words spread like fire. Heads nodded, eyes narrowed at Marcus. In this world, reputation was currency, and his was plummeting in real time. Marcus's chest tightened. He turned back to Olivia, desperate, furious. "You think you've won something by showing up here? You're nothing without me." Olivia's lips curved in the faintest smile. "We'll see about that." The statement wasn't just defiance. It was a promise. The orchestra, unsure, began to play again, but the air in the ballroom had shifted permanently. Marcus's laughter no longer carried authority. Chloe's glittering gown no longer drew admiration. All eyes followed Olivia as she walked past them, her presence leaving an imprint stronger than Marcus's wealth or Chloe's beauty ever could. The betrayal had been public, the humiliation undeniable, but instead of destroying her, it had elevated her. Olivia hadn't needed to scream or expose secrets. She had simply shown up, unafraid, and let Marcus and Chloe reveal their own ugliness. As she reached the far end of the ballroom, a shadow stepped forward. Tall, commanding, impossible to ignore. Alexander Reed. His appearance drew another wave of murmurs. Why was he here? Why was he watching Olivia? Marcus noticed too, and his stomach twisted. Reed was a man he couldn't control, a man whose influence outweighed his own. And now Reed's eyes weren't on him. They were locked on Olivia. Marcus's hand trembled as he reached for another glass of champagne, but the liquid suddenly tasted bitter. He could feel it, the shift, the unraveling. Tonight was supposed to cement his dominance. Instead, it had set the stage for his downfall. And Olivia? She walked calmly, silently, her emerald gown trailing behind her like a banner of quiet victory. She hadn't raised her voice, hadn't begged for dignity. She had claimed it. But the night was far from over. Because Marcus Bennett's arrogance was about to collide with Alexander Reed's power, and one word would be enough to silence him forever. The applause, the whispers, the music, all of it still echoed in Olivia Bennett's head long after she left the dazzling ballroom of the Crystal Heights Hotel. The cold Manhattan night hit her like a wall the moment the doors closed behind her. Cameras still flashed outside, reporters still shouted her name, but she moved past them as though in a trance. The emerald silk of her gown rustled softly against the pavement, and for the first time all evening, her hands shook. She had stood her ground in front of Marcus, faced Chloe's cruelty, silenced a ballroom with nothing more than her presence. To the world, she had seemed unbreakable. But once the limousine door shut and the tinted glass separated her from the noise, the weight of it all crashed down. Her breath caught in her throat. Her chest tightened. She pressed a trembling hand against her belly, whispering to her unborn child, "It's okay. It's okay." But the words sounded hollow, as if she were trying to convince herself more than the baby. The driver asked politely, "Where to, Mrs. Bennett?" She froze. The title, Mrs. Bennett, felt like a knife. She swallowed hard. "Home," she whispered, though the word no longer carried the warmth it once had. The penthouse was silent when she arrived, but silence was no longer her refuge. It pressed down on her like a weight, amplifying every thought, every fear. She slipped out of her gown and into a loose sweater, but comfort refused to come. She sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the empty side where Marcus used to sleep. The sheets still carried the faint trace of his cologne, bitter proof of the man she no longer recognized. Tears came then, hot and relentless, spilling down her cheeks before she could stop them. She pressed her face into her hands and sobbed, deep, gut-wrenching cries she hadn't allowed herself in years. At the gala, she had been strong. Here, in the hollow luxury of their home, she was just a woman broken by betrayal. Why wasn't I enough? The question slipped from her lips before she could stop it. She had given Marcus everything. Her career, her dreams, her loyalty, her youth. She had built her life around him, and still he had chosen someone else. Chloe's mocking smile replayed in her mind like a cruel film reel. Her sobs quieted, but despair lingered. She stood and wandered through the penthouse, each room echoing with memories. The dining table where she once planned intimate dinners now felt like a stage for his lies. The office where she proofread his contracts now looked like the scene of her own erasure. The nursery, the one she had begun decorating alone, was the cruelest of all. She stepped inside, her hands brushing over the half-painted walls. A small crib sat in the corner, still in its box, untouched. She had imagined Marcus building it with her, imagined his laughter filling the room as he planned a future with their child. Instead, she had unpacked it halfway by herself before stopping, overcome by the emptiness. She sank to the floor, her back against the wall, her hands clutching her stomach. "I don't know if I can do this," she whispered, her voice cracking. The fear was raw, sharp. How would she raise a child alone? How would she face a world that only saw her as the discarded wife? The hours passed slowly. The city outside glittered with life, but inside, Olivia felt frozen, trapped in her grief. She drifted between sobbing and silence, her body heavy with exhaustion. She thought of her mother again, of those final words. "Don't let someone else write your story." But right now, it felt as though her story had ended before it even began. The phone buzzed on the nightstand, breaking the silence. She hesitated before picking it up. Messages from friends, pitying words she couldn't bear to read. Missed calls from her father, worried but powerless. And then, one unread message from an unknown number. "You were stronger than he ever imagined. Don't forget it, AR." Her breath caught. Alexander Reed. She had seen him at the gala, his piercing gaze cutting through the noise, but watching her as if he knew something no one else did. Why would he reach out to her? What did he see in her that she could not see herself? But she wasn't ready for allies yet. She set the phone down, curling into herself on the bed. Her tears returned, softer this time, laced not only with grief but with exhaustion. Her body shook with quiet sobs until finally, sleep dragged her under. That night, Olivia dreamed of drowning. She dreamed of water closing over her head, of Marcus's laughter echoing in the distance, of Chloe's mocking eyes. She dreamed of holding her baby, only for it to slip from her arms into the darkness. She woke with a gasp, her face wet with tears, her body trembling. Dawn crept slowly into the penthouse, casting pale light across the room. Olivia sat on the edge of the bed, staring at the city skyline. The pain was still there. Raw, heavy, consuming. She felt weaker than she ever had, stripped of dignity, stripped of hope. But as she placed her hand on her belly, she felt a faint kick. Her breath hitched. For a moment, the despair wavered. The child inside her was real, alive, needing her. No matter how broken she felt, she wasn't completely alone. The tears came again, but this time they were quieter, mingled with something else, something small, fragile, but undeniable. Hope. It wasn't enough to rebuild her yet. She still felt shattered, lost in grief, consumed by betrayal. But the faint flutter inside her reminded her of the truth Marcus had never understood. She wasn't weak because she cried. She wasn't powerless because she hurt. She was human, and even the broken can rise. For now, she allowed herself the collapse. She allowed herself the tears, the fear, the despair. Tomorrow, perhaps she would stand again. But tonight, in the quiet dawn of heartbreak, Olivia let herself fall apart. Because sometimes, before you rise, you have to break completely. The morning after the gala felt like an endless fog. Olivia Bennet sat at her kitchen table, a cold cup of tea untouched in front of her. Her eyes were red, her body heavy, her heart still raw from the collapse of the night before. Yet beneath the exhaustion, there was a flicker of something she couldn't quite name, something stirred by the memory of that text message. "You were stronger than he ever imagined. Don't forget it." A.R. Alexander Reed. She barely knew him. Their paths had crossed once years ago, at a charity project where Olivia had designed a community center funded by his foundation. He had been polite but distant, the kind of man whose presence filled a room even when he said little. Rumors surrounded him, a billionaire investor who built empires in silence, who destroyed rivals with a single nod. People called him ruthless, untouchable. Yet last night, his eyes hadn't been cold. They had been steady, almost protective. The phone buzzed again. Another message. "Meet me. Noon." The Reed Tower. Her breath caught. Why would he want to meet her? What could she possibly offer a man like him? She almost deleted it, almost convinced herself it was a mistake. But something inside her whispered differently. Perhaps this was the beginning her mother's voice had always told her to claim. At noon, Olivia found herself standing before Reed Tower, a sleek monument of steel and glass rising into the clouds. She felt small, almost swallowed by its grandeur, but determination pushed her forward. Security greeted her by name as though they had been expecting her. She was ushered into a private elevator that whisked her to the top floor. The doors opened to reveal a vast office, walls of glass offering a panoramic view of Manhattan. There, standing by the window with his hands in his pockets, was Alexander Reed. He turned as she entered, his gaze steady, his expression unreadable. "Olivia," he said simply, his voice low and calm. She hesitated. "Mr. Reed, why did you call me here?" "Because you need to know the truth," he replied. He gestured for her to sit. She lowered herself into a leather chair, her hands folded tightly in her lap. Alexander took his place across from her, leaning forward slightly. "I watched what happened last night," he began. "The entire city did. Marcus humiliated you publicly, but he also exposed himself. Men like him, arrogant, careless, they always leave trails." Olivia frowned. "I don't understand." Alexander slid a folder across the desk. Her hands trembled as she opened it. Inside were photographs, financial statements, contracts, evidence. Her eyes widened as she scanned the pages. "These are his business records," she whispered. "Illegal accounts, fake deals." "Fraud," Alexander confirmed. "For months, Marcus has been moving money through shell companies. He thinks no one notices. He's wrong. I've been watching." Olivia looked up, stunned. "Why show me this?" "Because Marcus's downfall is inevitable," Alexander said. "But how it happens, that's up to you." Her heart pounded. For so long, she had felt powerless, invisible. Now, in her hands, lay the proof that could ruin Marcus not just as a husband, but as a man, as a businessman, as a name. But fear gripped her. If this comes out, it won't just destroy him, it will destroy everything connected to him. His company, his investors, people will lose jobs. Alexander's eyes softened slightly. "You're worried about others, even after what he's done to you. That's what makes you different from him. But listen to me, Olivia. Marcus already destroyed those things himself. He chose greed over loyalty. He gambled with lives. You can't save what he already set on fire." Tears pricked her eyes. "I don't want revenge. I just want my life back." "This isn't about revenge," Alexander said firmly. "It's about truth. You stood in that ballroom last night and showed strength Marcus never believed you had. But strength without action fades. This," he tapped the folder, "is action." Olivia sat in silence, staring at the papers. A storm of emotions raged inside her: fear, anger, hesitation, resolve. She thought of her child, of the future she wanted to build. She thought of Marcus's sneer, Chloe's cruelty, the humiliation she endured. And then she thought of her mother's words again. "Don't let someone else write your story." When she finally looked up, her eyes were steady. "What do you want from me?" Alexander leaned back, his lips curving slightly. "Nothing. What I want is irrelevant. What matters is what you want. But if you decide to act, know this, you won't be alone." The words struck her like a lifeline. For so long she had carried everything alone, the silence, the sacrifices, the pain. And now someone powerful was offering not pity, but partnership. Still, doubt lingered. "Why me? You don't even know me." Alexander's gaze held hers. "I know enough. I know that you're stronger than you think. And I know men like Marcus. He underestimates people until it ruins him. Don't make the same mistake with yourself." Silence stretched between them, heavy but not uncomfortable. For the first time in months, Olivia felt something new: possibility. She closed the folder carefully, her fingers steady now. "If I do this, there's no going back." Alexander nodded. "That's the point." She rose slowly, the weight of the decision pressing on her shoulders. Yet beneath that weight was a strange relief, as though she had finally been handed the pen to write her own story again. At the door, she paused, turning back to him. "Why send me that message last night?" His eyes softened, just for a moment. "Because I wanted you to remember who you are. Not Marcus's wife, not Chloe's rival. Olivia Bennett, a woman who deserves to stand on her own." Her throat tightened. She nodded once and left, the folder clutched against her chest. Back in the elevator, as the doors closed, she whispered to her reflection, "I am not broken. I am not done." The city stretched before her when she stepped outside, loud, ruthless, alive. For the first time in a long time, she didn't feel swallowed by it. She felt part of it. She had walked into Reed Tower uncertain, fragile. She walked out carrying the power to destroy Marcus Bennett. And deep inside, for the first time since her world had shattered, Olivia allowed herself a small, fierce smile. Because the twist of fate was clear now. Marcus thought betrayal had ended her story. In truth, it had just given her the weapon to begin again. The folder lay on Olivia Bennett's desk for 3 days, untouched, yet impossible to ignore. Every time she passed by, her eyes caught the bold black letters of Marcus's fraudulent contracts, the photographs, the accounts. It was as if the papers pulsed with a heartbeat of their own, demanding her decision. On the 4th morning, Olivia woke with clarity. She stood before the mirror, her reflection pale, but no longer fragile. The woman staring back at her wasn't the same person who had wept on the nursery floor or collapsed in despair. Something had shifted. She no longer wanted to hide behind silence. She wanted to rise. She slipped into a soft cream dress, simple but elegant, and pulled her hair back. She didn't bother with heavy makeup. Her eyes carried enough fire on their own. She pressed a hand against her belly, whispering, "We're gonna be okay." The transformation began not with grand gestures, but with small choices. She returned to her studio, the place she hadn't touched since Marcus convinced her to abandon her career. Dust coated the tables, sketches lay scattered, abandoned halfway. Olivia stood in the quiet space, inhaling the familiar scent of pencils, paper, and wood. Her hands trembled as she picked up an unfinished design, but soon her pencil began to move again. Lines flowed into shapes, shapes into visions. For the first time in years, she felt alive in her craft. Word spread quickly. A former client reached out, then another. Within weeks, Olivia was designing again, not just homes, but a future that was hers alone. But transformation wasn't only professional. Olivia knew she couldn't face Marcus and Chloe still cloaked in the vulnerability they expected of her. She needed to reclaim her power. So she allowed herself something she hadn't in years: self-care. She traded the dull clothes Marcus preferred for dresses that reflected her own taste. Bold colors, elegant cuts. She exercised gently, strengthening her body as her pregnancy advanced. And she surrounded herself with people who reminded her of her worth. An old college friend who believed in her talent, her father who reminded her she was still his strong girl, and quietly, unexpectedly, Alexander Reed. Alexander didn't hover. He didn't demand. He appeared when needed, offering resources without pity, guidance without intrusion. One afternoon, he stopped by her studio. He studied her sketches silently before finally saying, "You create warmth in a world obsessed with cold perfection. That's why people will follow you." His words, spoken so simply, carried more weight than any applause she'd ever received. For the first time, Olivia felt not only seen, but respected. Still, doubt lingered in quiet corners of her heart. Late at night, she lay awake, whispering fears into the darkness. What if I fail? What if I can't raise this child alone? What if Marcus finds a way to ruin me? But each time she remembered the folder, the evidence, the truth. Marcus's empire was already crumbling. He just didn't know it yet. The true test came when the invitations arrived. Another gala, this one hosted by the Harrington Foundation, an event Marcus would never miss. Olivia held the envelope in her hands, her pulse quickening. The thought of walking back into that glittering world terrified her. But then she remembered the look on Marcus's face the night she had stood in the ballroom, unbroken. He had feared her strength, and she intended to make him fear it again. The day of the gala, Olivia prepared with quiet determination. She chose a gown of deep sapphire silk, its design her own, modern, elegant, powerful. As she fastened a diamond bracelet, a gift from her late mother, she whispered, "I'll carry you with me tonight." When the car arrived, she stepped out onto the red carpet, not as Marcus's wife, not as the humiliated woman the tabloids pitied, but as Olivia Bennett, designer, mother, survivor. The cameras erupted in flashes, reporters shouting her name. But this time, she didn't shy away. She lifted her chin, offering them a calm smile that spoke louder than words. "I am not broken." Inside, the ballroom buzzed with speculation. Guests whispered, investors turned, and Marcus nearly dropped his glass of champagne when he saw her. Chloe's eyes widened, her lips curling into a sneer. "She's back," Chloe muttered, venom dripping from every syllable. Marcus forced a laugh, though it rang hollow. "Let her play dress up. She'll never matter again." But deep down, he knew he was lying. Olivia moved through the crowd with quiet confidence. She wasn't loud, wasn't flashy, yet everywhere she walked, people followed her with their eyes. She had become the unexpected star, the woman who had survived betrayal and returned stronger. Investors whispered that she looked like a woman ready to rise. Socialites murmured that she carried herself like royalty. And in the corner of the room, Alexander Reed watched with a faint smile, his glass of wine untouched. For Marcus and Chloe, the evening unraveled quickly. Their forced laughter sounded shrill. Their attempts at charm felt desperate. Every time Olivia's name passed across someone's lips, Chloe's smile faltered. Every glance toward Olivia made Marcus's confidence crumble further. Olivia, however, remained composed. She didn't confront them, didn't lash out. She didn't need to. Her transformation spoke for itself. And then, as the speeches began, Olivia felt Alexander step beside her. His presence was steady, grounding. He leaned in, his voice low but firm. "You've already won, Olivia. They just don't know it yet." She looked at him, her eyes steady. "I'm not done." Alexander nodded once. "Good, because the world deserves to see you finish what he tried to bury." The orchestra swelled, champagne glasses clinked, and the gala carried on. But for Olivia, the night marked a shift. She wasn't hiding anymore. She wasn't surviving. She was rising. And Marcus Bennett? For the first time in his life, he looked across a room and realized he had lost something he could never buy back. Respect. Because Olivia Bennett had transformed, not into someone new, but into the woman she was always meant to be. The Harrington Foundation Gala shimmered with opulence, but beneath the glittering chandeliers, tension buzzed like a storm ready to break. Olivia Bennett moved through the ballroom with calm grace, her sapphire gown flowing behind her like liquid night. Every head turned, every whisper followed. She no longer looked like Marcus's discarded wife. She looked like power. At the far side of the room, Marcus Bennett gripped his champagne glass so tightly the stem nearly snapped. Chloe Adams leaned against him, her smile sharp, but her eyes betrayed unease. The crowd was not laughing with them anymore. The spotlight they once craved had shifted entirely to Olivia. "Relax," Marcus muttered through clenched teeth. "She's nothing without me." Chloe forced a laugh, but her gaze lingered on Olivia, unsettled. "Then why can't anyone stop looking at her?" The speeches began. Donors paraded across the stage, each boasting about generosity and legacy. But the real show wasn't on stage. It was unfolding silently in the audience, where Marcus shifted nervously every time Olivia's name rippled through whispered conversations. Then, as if orchestrated by fate itself, the master of ceremonies announced, "Tonight, we're honored to have with us Mr. Alexander Reed, whose foundation continues to change lives across this city." Applause thundered as Alexander rose. His presence was magnetic, his every movement commanding. He stepped onto the stage, his eyes sweeping the crowd before landing briefly, deliberately, on Olivia. Marcus's throat tightened. He had dreaded this. Reed was a man who spoke little, but whose words carried the weight of empires. "Ladies and gentlemen," Alexander began, his voice low but resonant, "tonight we celebrate not just wealth, but responsibility, because wealth without integrity is nothing more than theft." The room stilled, his gaze shifted, sharp as a blade, toward Marcus. Gasps fluttered as subtle nods confirmed what many already suspected. This was no ordinary speech. This was war. Marcus forced a laugh, rising to his feet. Now, Reed, let's not get dramatic. We're here for charity, not business rivalries." But Alexander didn't flinch. "Business? This isn't business. This is truth." He raised a hand, and suddenly screens around the ballroom flickered to life. Documents appeared. Marcus's fraudulent accounts, his shell companies, his fake contracts. The very evidence Olivia had once clutched in trembling hands. The crowd erupted in shock. Voices overlapped, questions, gasps, disbelief. Marcus's face drained of color. Chloe's hand flew to her mouth, her carefully painted smile shattering. This is fabricated," Marcus shouted, his voice cracking. "She's behind this." He jabbed a finger toward Olivia, desperate, sweating. "She's bitter, she's trying to ruin me." But Olivia didn't rise to his accusations. She remained seated, calm, her eyes fixed on him with quiet strength. Alexander stepped forward, his expression cool. "You built your empire on lies, Marcus. You betrayed investors, you betrayed this city, and worst of all, you betrayed the woman who stood by you when you had nothing." All eyes turned to Olivia. Instead of pity, there was admiration now. The broken wife had become the woman who stood tall while her husband crumbled. Marcus's voice cracked with desperation. "Olivia, please, don't do this. We can fix this. I made mistakes, but we were a team once. You can't destroy me like this." He stepped closer, almost stumbling as he reached out toward her. "Think of our child. Think of everything we've built. I'm begging you." The sight was pitiful. The arrogant man, once untouchable, now reduced to pleading in front of everyone. Chloe stepped back, her eyes wide. She saw it too, his empire collapsing, his power slipping. And she knew she would not sink with him. "Marcus," she hissed, pulling her arm away. "You promised me security, power. You're nothing now. Nothing." And with that, Chloe turned, pushing past photographers, her sequins flashing one last time before disappearing into obscurity. The room gasped again. The mistress had abandoned him, and the wife he had humiliated sat silent, watching his downfall. Marcus fell to his knees before Olivia, his voice cracked, raw with panic. "Please, Liv, forgive me. I'll change. I'll be better. Just don't let them take everything. Don't let them take me." The silence that followed was heavy. Everyone waited for Olivia to speak, to decide his fate. But before she could answer, Alexander Reed stepped forward. He looked down at Marcus, his eyes cold, his voice carrying the weight of final judgment. One word. "Finished." The word cut through the air like thunder. The room erupted. Gasps, murmurs, applause. Security moved swiftly, placing hands on Marcus's shoulders. He struggled, shouting, but his voice was drowned out by the roar of the crowd. Cameras flashed as he was dragged from the ballroom, his pleas echoing down the marble halls. Olivia sat still, her hand resting gently on her belly. She hadn't needed to humiliate him. She hadn't needed to raise her voice. The truth, revealed in the light, had done it for her. Guests turned back to her, some applauding, some whispering in awe. To them, she was no longer Marcus Bennett's wife. She was Olivia Bennett, the woman who had faced betrayal, endured humiliation, and emerged unbroken. Alexander returned to her side. For a brief moment, he bent closer, his voice low so only she could hear. "It's over. You don't owe him a single piece of yourself anymore." Her throat tightened, tears stinging her eyes, not of grief, but of release. She nodded once, steady. "I know." The orchestra resumed. The gala continued, but the night would be remembered for one thing: the fall of Marcus Bennett. Silenced not by scandal alone, but by the strength of the woman he had underestimated, and by one word from a man more powerful than he could ever dream to be. And in that moment, Olivia realized her story was no longer about survival. It was about victory. The news broke before sunrise. Fraud allegations rock Bennett Enterprises. Marcus Bennett removed from Harrington Gala in disgrace. Olivia Bennett, the wife who wouldn't break. Headlines screamed across New York. Marcus's face was plastered on every front page, his downfall dissected by analysts and gossips alike. Investors pulled out, stock prices plummeted, and by noon, Marcus Bennett's empire was rubble. Chloe Adams, once eager to bask in his spotlight, vanished without a word, leaving him to drown alone in the scandal he created. For Olivia, the morning was strangely quiet. She sat in her kitchen, sipping tea, sunlight spilling across the table. Her phone buzzed constantly. Calls from journalists, messages from old acquaintances suddenly eager to reconnect. She ignored them all. For the first time in years, she didn't feel the need to explain herself. The world had seen the truth with its own eyes. Her father called, his voice warm with pride. "You held your head high, Liv. Your mother would have been proud." Tears filled her eyes, but they were gentle this time, not heavy. She smiled softly. "I hope so, Dad. I really hope so." In the days that followed, Olivia returned to her studio with renewed focus. Clients poured in, people who admired not just her talent but her strength. "You understand what a home really means," one said. "Not just walls and furniture, but resilience." Her designs became more than work. They became symbols of rebuilding, of starting fresh. She poured her pain, her healing, and her hope into every line she drew. Alexander Reed remained a quiet presence. He didn't hover, didn't demand thanks, but every so often he appeared, at her studio, at her doorstep, with simple gestures. A bouquet of white lilies, a file of contacts who wanted to invest in her business, an invitation to speak at a design conference. His support was steady, never suffocating. And in his silence, Olivia found something rare: respect without expectation. One evening, weeks after the gala, Olivia stood on the balcony of her penthouse. the city glowing beneath her. The winter air was crisp, carrying the hum of life. Alexander joined her, his hands tucked in his coat pockets. For a long while they stood in silence, watching the skyline. "You've changed," he said finally, his voice calm. Olivia smiled faintly. "No, I just remembered who I was." Alexander studied her profile, the strength in her posture, the quiet fire in her eyes. "Marcus thought he defined you, but he only revealed you." Her throat tightened. She turned to him, gratitude shining in her eyes. "Thank you for everything." He shook his head. "Don't thank me. You did this. You chose to rise." Their eyes met, and for the first time, Olivia felt something stir in her heart that wasn't pain, wasn't fear. It was the faint flicker of possibility, of love perhaps, but built on respect, not possession. She didn't rush it. She didn't need to. For now, it was enough to know she wasn't alone. As spring approached, Olivia gave birth to a healthy baby boy. In the quiet of the hospital room, she cradled him against her chest, tears slipping down her cheeks. Not tears of sorrow, but of joy, of healing. "You're my new beginning," she whispered, kissing his tiny forehead. Her father held the baby next, his eyes misty. "Strong, like his mother," he murmured. Olivia laughed softly. For the first time in a long time, her laughter wasn't forced. Meanwhile, Marcus faced his reckoning. Courtrooms replaced ballrooms, and prison whispers replaced applause. The man who once strutted with arrogance now sat hunched in silence, stripped of his empire, his mistress, his pride. His pleas for forgiveness echoed unanswered. Chloe, too, faded into obscurity, her beauty no longer currency without the wealth to back it. The city moved on, but the memory of Olivia's quiet defiance at the gala lingered. She became a symbol whispered about at luncheons, admired in magazines, celebrated in features. The woman who rose from betrayal. But Olivia never let the attention consume her. Her focus was her son, her craft, her peace. Months later, another gala arrived. This time, it was Olivia's name on the invitation. Not as a guest, not as someone's plus one, but as the featured designer of the event. Her work transformed the venue. Warm lighting, elegant designs, spaces that felt alive. Guests marveled, not just at the beauty of the room, but at the woman who had created it. When Olivia stepped onto the stage to thank them, she paused, her eyes sweeping the crowd. She saw admiration, respect, inspiration reflected back at her. She took a breath and spoke, her voice steady, carrying across the room. "I once believed my worth depended on someone else's opinion. I once gave up my voice, my dreams, my identity. But betrayal taught me something important. It taught me that silence is not strength. Strength is standing, even when your world has shattered. Strength is choosing to rise, not for revenge, but for yourself, for your future, for those who depend on you. Tonight, I stand not as Marcus Bennett's wife, not as his victim, but as Olivia Bennett. And I promise you this, women are never as weak as the world wants them to believe." The applause rose like thunder, echoing off the walls. Olivia felt her chest swell, her heart light. She wasn't just surviving anymore. She was thriving. In the corner of the room, Alexander Reed watched, a faint smile on his lips. He didn't step into her spotlight. He didn't need to. He knew her story wasn't his to claim. It was hers, entirely. That night, as Olivia returned home, she placed her sleeping son gently in his crib, kissed his forehead, and whispered, "We made it." She stood by the window, the city glowing beneath her, and felt a peace she hadn't known in years. Marcus had been silenced. Chloe had been forgotten. The world had witnessed her fall, but now it was witnessing her rise. And Olivia Bennett, once broken, once erased, now stood as living proof that no betrayal, no humiliation, no heartbreak could ever define her again. Because in the end, she hadn't just survived, she had won. So dear friends, the story has come to an end. And if you are still here with me right now, it means something has touched your heart in a way words alone cannot explain. Olivia's journey is more than drama. It's a mirror. How many of us have faced betrayal, humiliation, or the feeling of being invisible? Yet, as the Stoic philosopher Marcus Aurelius once said, you have power over your mind, not outside events. Realize this, and you will find strength. Olivia found her strength, not in revenge, but in rediscovering her worth. That is a lesson for us all. No storm, no betrayal, no heartbreak can define us unless we let it. If this story stirred something in you, don't let it stop here. Share it with someone who needs hope, hit the like button to spread its message, and subscribe so we can continue this journey of healing, resilience, and victory together. Because like Olivia, we rise.